everyone, welcome back, or welcome if you're new. I'm so happy to see you. I have so many things to say and so little time, so I'm just gonna say them all. First of all, I've been sick for like 2 weeks, so my voice is very weird. Apologies for that. And secondly, I'm so happy to greet you to these bonus episodes. These weren't planned. Usually I was thinking of just posting during the summer, but since I had a break from my classes for my master's, I thought of bringing you some content I hope you will enjoy. Today, we will be exploring, as usual, everything about women's lives and how they're influenced by societal traditions and patriarchal rules, but in specific, we're going to talk about an historic event that took place in Switzerland, and that I really think is worth talking about. Swiss women went on strike last June 14th, 2023, to demand equality. More than 300,000 people participated, according to the Swiss work unions, to celebrate the National Feminist Strike Day. This is not usual in Switzerland, since it has already happened in 2019 and times before, but it's nonetheless an important event that should be understood properly. These are some of the examples of the slogans and shouts pronounced on the day of the strike that were demanding equality and respect. The strike is organized by the Union Syndicale Suisse, USS, which is a major labor union in Switzerland. USS is an umbrella organization that represents the interests of various labor unions and workers' associations across the country of Switzerland. In an effort to mobilize the masses once more, the USS launched this second strike, reminiscent of the powerful movement in 2019, which saw an impressive turnout of 500,000 people. I keep saying that 2019 was the previous strike, but that's not totally correct. Because on June 14th, 1991, Switzerland witnessed a monumental event where 500,000 women took the streets for the first women's strike, calling for equality in pay, social insurance, and the end of discrimination and sexual harassment. This historic mobilization was initiated by a small group of women watchmakers and organized by trade unionist Christian Brunner, and marked a significant political demonstration in Swiss history, aiming to address the glaring gaps between men's and women's pay rights. The strike was strategically timed to coincide with the 10th anniversary of a constitutional amendment for gender equality, which, however, had yet to be fully realized in legislation, highlighting the slow progress since Swiss women gained federal voting rights in 1971. Despite the initial reluctance to label the 1991 mobilization as a strike, due to its association with paid work, the event ultimately embraced a broader political significance, echoing the spirit of historical strikes and the global feminist movement. Despite the opposition and challenges, the 1991 strike led to tangible advancements in gender equality in Switzerland, which included the election of Ruth Dreyfus to the Federal Council, after a backlash against the initial refusal of the parliament to elect the previously mentioned Christian Brunner. To that followed many more legal reforms, such as the 1996 equality legislation, the legislation of abortion in 2002, and the implementation of maternity leave in 2004. All of these were direct outcomes of the strike's impact. We talked about the 2019 strike. How about it? The 2019's women's strike in Switzerland was a significant event, making a resurgence of feminist activism in the country. Coming in nearly 30 years after the first historical strike in 1991, Swiss women once again mobilized on June 14, 2019, to demand gender equality and challenge the persistent disparities in various aspects of society. The strike addressed issues such as unequal pay, gender discrimination, sexual harassment, and the unequal distribution of unpaid labor. Hundreds of thousands of women across Switzerland participated in various forms of protest, including demonstration, marches, and symbolic actions, like banging pots and pans, wearing purple, which is the color that symbolizes women's rights, and staging walkouts from the workplaces. The strike got broad support from trade unions, the feminist groups, and the various sectors of society, reflecting the widespread concern over gender inequality issues in the country. And don't think, but also many men showed up to show their support for the movement. The strikers in 2019 called for concrete legislative changes to ensure equal pay for equal work, a better representation of women in political and economic decision-making positions, a more robust measure to combat gender-based violence, and a greater support for work-life balance, including affordable childcare and parental leaving policies. The 2019 strike also sparked significant media coverage and public debate, raising awareness about gender inequalities in Switzerland. And it highlighted the fact that despite Switzerland's reputation for progressivism, there are still substantial gaps in gender equality. So what was the impact, after all, of the strike? The message that was taken to the streets by the hundreds of thousands of women was clear. This strike is just the start of a long-term push to shift laws, habits, and mindset, especially in the parliament. After the strike of the 14th of June 2019, a few key proposals have been put forward in the parliament. The first one was inspired by an alarming Amnesty International report that saw 1 in 5 Swiss women having faced sexual assaults. Therefore, 6 parliamentary requests had been made. These requests were coming from a range of political parties and were calling for the government to step up prevention and support victims. They also suggested that the legal definition of rape should include lack of consent. Another proposal was coming from the Green Party, who is pushing to all political parties to offer election lists with equal gender representation. Despite a previous attempt in 2017 to mandate gender balance on these lists, the parliament still chose to leave gender promotion to the party's discretion. A proposal coming from Isabelle Mouret, a radical liberal politician, was focusing on helping women re-enter the workforce after they have taken time off for family reasons. She had requested a government report to assess the needs and resources available for women in this kind of situations. Aline Treed from the Greens parties is advocating for legislation to eliminate the financial disadvantages that women face. Her motion called for government action to reduce the costs associated with childbearing and address pension disparities. Marianne Streif-Feller from the Evangelical Party proposed a national women museum to celebrate Swiss women history, highlighting Switzerland's status as a country with the most museums per capita worldwide. In total, 7 parliamentary interventions were recorded on strike day, with more expected to come the following days. Local and cantonal initiatives emerged as well, like Vaud's ban on sex advertising. Efforts to increase female political representation are still ongoing, and more women are expected to run in the federal elections than what had happened in 2015. This movement signaled a potential shift towards a greater gender equality in Swiss politics. But if so, why are Swiss women on strike again? According to the official website, the main revendication of the current strike are the following. Women continue to earn lower wages and pensions than men, they do take more unpaid work, and they still face discrimination and harassment. There is statistical evidence that supports the earning gap, and it can be found on the analysis of wage differences between women and men based on the survey of the Swiss Structure of Earnings, SSE, of 2020. The study refers to a base population of 3.7 million employees in Swiss companies in the secondary and tertiary sectors. Of these, the proportion of women in the economy as a whole is a whopping 44%. It has been highlighted that the average gross monthly salary for women, standardized on a full-time basis, is 6,817 francs, whereas for men, it's 8,317. In other words, women's average salary is 18% lower than men. In addition to this average difference, the median difference is also significant. The median corresponds to the salary of a person at the exact center of the distribution of salaries, which means that half of all employees earn more than the median and the other half earn less than the median. The median gross salary for women is 6,090 per month, and for men is 6,921 Swiss francs. On the basis of the median, therefore, women's pay is 12% lower than men's. What about the different sectors? We talked about secondary and tertiary. Is there any difference? To set the context, it is important to mention that in private companies, women account for 42% of employees, whereas in the public sector, hence the confederation, the cantons, the municipalities, the district, and the public authorities, their proportion rises to 53%, representing therefore a majority. And when we talk about average gender pay gap just mentioned, it is higher in the private sector, with almost 20% of a difference, than in the public sector, which is closer to 15%. Okay, but what about the different job types now? The participation of women and men in the job market varies greatly. As you may have guessed, or if you listened to the previous episode on gender gap, men are more numerous in industry and manufacturing activities, while women are more present in health and social aid activities. We're talking at 78% for these social activities. And they're also present greatly in retail with 67%. There are also clear registered gender differences in the distribution of the net pay and special payments, for example, of bonuses. The average net salary for women, therefore the actual amount of money an individual will take home after the required deductions, have been accounted for at 33% lower than the average net salary for men. Women are also overrepresented at the lower end of the net salary scale, which is the area where people are earning less than 5,000 francs a month. And this is due in part to the higher proportion of part-time workers. And in addition, the average share of special payments, like bonuses, in the gross pay is lower for women than men. But there's still one interesting point to talk about. Researchers question themselves on the reasons behind this gap. And still quoting the same statistical paper as the beginning, the breakdown of pay differentials is put in two categories: explained and unexplained components. The two variables can be defined as follows. The explained pay gap quantitatively determines the pay gap between women and men that can be explained by differences in observable characteristics, such as occupation, branch, training, professional status, etc. However, the unexplained wage gap, that accounts by 48% of the total gap, defines the differences that remain after comparing the incomes of women and men who, on average, have the same observable explanatory factors, such as education, occupation, sectors, etc. Therefore, an unexplained pay gap arises when women and men with the same characteristics obtain different average salaries. The unexplained pay gap is also known as the residual pay gap or the adjusted pay gap. The most recent results, compared to the previous one from 2012-2018, show that the average gender gap in 2020 is 16.4% disadvantages for women. This means that on average, women's standardized full-time salaries are approximately 16.4% lower than those of men in the same conditions. But if we adjust these factors such as age, education level, industry, etc., that account for the 52% of this gap, the gender pay gap in the total economy that is unexplained is 7.8%. In other words, women with comparable and observable characteristics earn an average of 7.8% less than men. In 2018, so 2 years before 2020, this gap was practically identical at 8.2%. Researchers also analyzed a geographical perspective, where the average wage gap ranges from 12% in the area of the Lake Geneva, and goes up to 23% in the Greater Zurich region. The significance of these regional gaps is largely explained by the observed influencing factors, such as sectors, profession, company sizes, etc. Therefore, the unexplained wage gap varies less noticeably, and it ranges between 7% in the Lake Geneva region and 11% in the eastern Switzerland. Other dimensions have been also taken into account when it comes to wage gaps, and the first one is age. The unexplained wage gap are significantly higher in older employees compared to younger ones, 3% for those under 30 and 10% for those over 49 years old. Marital status, where the unexplained wage gap is 3% both for single women and men, but is significantly higher for married employees, up to 10%. The higher unexplained wage gap for married employees suggests that marital status may play a role in salary discrepancies beyond what can be attributed to its observable factors. This finding raises important questions about potential gender biases or other societal factors that could be contributing to the differences in earning between married men and married women in the workforce. A third variable is occupational position. Wage gaps tend to increase with the higher level of hierarchy. The highest unexplained wage is observed among senior executives, 15%. Unequal distribution of paid and unpaid work. This has to be talked about, because it's another significant reason for women's lower income, because they continue to bear the majority of domestic and caregiving responsibilities, resulting in them more often working part-time, out of a necessity compared to the counterpart men. When considering both the paid and unpaid work, women and men collectively perform almost the same number of working hours, amounting to at least 50 hours per week. However, women spend more than 60% of those hours without being paid, while the opposite happens for men, who contribute only 40% of their time to unpaid work. Moreover, in the 2023 federal elections in Switzerland, we saw a shift in the composition of its parliament, becoming more right-wing, less green, and notably more male-dominated. If you remember before, when we talked about the 2019 strike, we forecasted that more and more women would have gotten into politics. In fact, in 2019, women held 42% of the seats in the House of Representatives, which was a significant increase at the time. However, it has now regressed back to 38.5%, reducing the female representation to 77 seats out of the 200 available. This decline is putting a halt on a previously steady progress towards gender equality in the Swiss politics. The decrease in female parliamentarians is attributed to the electoral strategies of the various parties, especially the right-wing Swiss People's Party, which had the lowest proportion of women candidates at 25% among all of them. The losses of seats by the Green Party and the Liberal Greens, which were previously occupied by women, also contributed to this downturn. Political scientist Chloé Jans highlighted that the political climate of 2019, which focused on equality and feminism, contrasted sharply with the 2023 elections, where economy, war, migrations were dominant themes. And these are traditionally associated with male interests as well. Despite the setback, organizations like Alliance F and campaigns such as Helvetia Ruft remain optimistic about the future of women's representation in Swiss politics, emphasizing the non-linear nature of progress and the enduring presence of women in parliament. They note that despite the overall decline, some parties like the Centre and the Social Democratic parties still have seen an increase in female politicians. Regional disparities also play a role, with German-speaking cantons electing a higher proportion of women compared to the French-speaking and the Italian-speaking regions. Notably, Jura and Valais elected no female these past elections, and Neuchâtel only one. Internationally, The reduction of female representation has caused Switzerland to fall out of the top 30 countries for gender parity in parliament, according to the rankings in the Interparliamentary Union. With a female representation of only 38.5%, Switzerland now ranks 31st, which is a significant drop from its 15th place in 2019. This shift reflects on the ongoing challenges and dynamics that Switzerland is fighting to achieve gender equality in political representation, and underscores the importance of electoral strategies, political climate, and regional differences in shaping the composition of the parliament. So these were some of the arguments to support the 14th of June strike of 2023. But now, how did it actually go about on the day? What actually happened? Other than organizing a march, which you heard the scream at the beginning of the episode, 3 other initiatives were planned so that all workers could attend, even symbolically, to the strike. At 10:46 a.m., the slogan was, "Angry about our miserable pensions." Because according to the official website, the reasons behind this moment of anger lies because the Federal Council's news report on the gender overall earning gap, published in September 2022, the pension gap between men and women is up to 34.6%, which means, metaphorically, that for the whole life, women worked 2.46 hours without counting for their pensions. This gap is still considered unacceptable, and it still won't be closed, regardless of the LPP 21, which is the most recent pension reform in the country, as it was promised during the AVS 21 campaign. The AVS 21, to summarize it briefly, is the Old Age and Survivors Insurance, and it forecasts a pension supplement that is a fixed monthly amount paid for life in addition to the regular pension. The second moment was at 1:33 p.m. and the slogan was, "Arms crossed, this country is losing its grip." Still, according to the Federal Council new report, the overall gap in earned income between women and men for all hours working during a working life is 43.2%. At European level, Switzerland ranks 28th out of 30 countries. And calculated in hours over working day, this gap is 3 hours and 27 minutes, which metaphorically means that from 1:33 p.m. onwards, women work for free. The third moment was at 3:24 p.m. and the slogan was "No pay, no work." Also in 2019, the arms were crossed at 3:24 p.m. and this is the equal pay hour. Hence, the moment from which, on the basis of the 8-hour working day, so from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. and from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., female workers are no longer paid. In 2019, the gap was 19%. In 2020, the gap is 18%, which is a small percentage less, but this doesn't take into account the pandemic, which had a major impact on female workers, nor it takes into account inflation. As we wrap up this episode, it's clear that the recent events in Switzerland are not just a momentary outcry, but a profound call for change. The strike on June 14th stands as a powerful testament to the struggle for equality, drawing attention to the persistent disparity in wages, pensions, and the disproportionate burden of unpaid labor that women continue to shoulder. The data we have dissected today offers a stark reminder of the systemic challenges women face, not just in Switzerland but globally, from wage gap influenced by factors like sector, job type, and region, to the larger societal issues reflected in unequal distribution of paid and unpaid work. The complexity of these issues is undeniable. Yet, in between these statistics and the analysis lies a message of resilience and solidarity. The action taken on the National Feminist Strike Day, the marches, the symbolic moments of protest, are not just demonstration of discontent. They are powerful affirmations of a collective demand for a more just and equitable society. It is important also to remember Switzerland's slow pace in adopting equal rights. Swiss women got to vote only in 1971, much later than in many other countries. And this slow progress makes the recent strikes even more significant, because it shows that even though Switzerland has been late to make changes in the past, the fight for fair treatment and equal rights is still strong. The demonstration and demands that we've talked about today are not just about the issues of today's situation, but are also connected to a longer history of seeking equality. As we sign off this episode, let's carry with us not just the echoes of the slogans and shouts from the streets of Switzerland, but the resolve to understand, engage with, and act upon these crucial issues. Until next time, if you learned something from this episode, please share it as much as you can. But most importantly, as I always say, keep the conversation going. I would like to thank you so much for joining me today. And as usual, see you super soon. Bye!